It's 9 o'clock here in New York City, which means all polls have now closed in Michigan, where Fox News can now project that Donald Trump will win the state's Republican presidential primary, according to Fox exit polls and early vote tallies. Ted Cruz and John Kasich are locked in a battle for second place, while Marco Rubio appears headed for a fourth-place finish.
It is too early to project a winner over on the Democratic side, but at this time, it's looking surprisingly close, with Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton still battling for the top spot, according to Fox News exit polls and early voting returns. Now, this is a departure from months of pre-election polls, which consistently showed Mrs. Clinton with a double-digit lead over Bernie Sanders in Michigan.
Brit Hume is back with us now from Florida. Brit, going in, it looked like Trump was well positioned in Michigan, but the fact that there's a battle now for second place seems like Ted Cruz is outperforming in a place that's right next door to Ohio.
I agree with that, Brett, and I think it's important because if John Kasich were to pull out a second-place finish, he could have a claim to some momentum here going into his home state of Ohio. He would get there'd be media buzz about him, there'd be an additional round of coverage, and Marco Rubio would be even further eclipsed, leaving Kasich with that lane, if there is really a lane for what we might call a mainstream sort of non-controversial favorite of the Republican leadership. But, obviously we won't know for a while. Cruz is clearly in this, and he's going to be in this. I think this tonight will illustrate that. He'll get some delegates and so on. But Kasich is the interesting story, it seems to me, and the question then becomes whether he really gets a tailwind coming out of this state to carry him forward into the critical moment that comes a week from tonight in Ohio for him.
Britt, if Kasich winds up in third place in Michigan and Cruz winds up in second, does Ted Cruz run the risk of winning the battle and losing the war here with a disappointing finish, relatively speaking, for Kasich in Michigan before next week's Ohio, and Marco Rubio struggling in this race, although he maintains he's going to win his home state of Florida, and yet, as you point out, the latest poll today suggested Trump has reestablished his significant lead there. Doesn't Cruz need those two gentlemen to win their home states in order to stop Trump?
Well, I think that's mathematically, you're right, Megan. There's an interesting question, though, I think, that surrounds Kasich here, and it's about him and about Rubio. Rubio took on Donald Trump to a degree that no one else has, certainly not Kasich, who hasn't really taken him on at all. A lot of people in the Republican Party thought it was a job that needed to be done. And it was Rubio that gave Trump really a dose of his own medicine with the personal attacks and the ridicule and so on that he mounted. It may have made a dent in Trump. Well, it's hard to know that. But it does not seem now, as we look back on it, to have helped Rubio very much. Meanwhile, Kasich stayed out of the fight. Stayed out of the fight entirely. In fact, it could be argued by some that here was the Republican Party in kind of a death struggle for its future, trying to take down a guy whose lack of consistent conservative principles and whose behavior was a real threat to the party. And it was a battle Kasich chose to sit out and is now benefiting by that. In fact, some people might say that, he sat out this war and now he's going around, in the person of Rubio, overtaking these other candidates, overtaking Rubio in particular, if that's what happens, and shooting the wounded, and is benefiting from it. We'll see.
Brett, let's, not bury the lead here. This is Donald Trump winning another big state here. And as you look at the exit polls, it's pretty amazing to look at the four candidate qualities important that mattered most to you. Can win in November. Donald Trump, 41%. Tells it like it is, 68%. Can bring needed change, 41%. He is racking up voters in these states again and again and again with that outsider position.
That's right, and that 68% number you cited tells it like it is. I think it goes to the heart of his appeal. People aren't really thinking too seriously, I don't believe, about the nature of his positions, the details. In fact, sometimes he can't even cite details of his position. But they like that forceful message he has, the denunciations of the people in power. They're angry with the people in power. They're disappointed in the people in power. And here's a guy who, to them, is really saying it as it is. And that, I think, is the key to his support. And it is a sentiment that is shared, as two distant places as Mississippi and Michigan tonight. Those places politically are very different. But in terms of the feeling about Donald Trump, It is solid. It is perhaps not a majority, but it is quite strong, and it means that we've got there's no knocking him out of this race anytime soon that I can see.
Yeah, Brit, just quickly, you know, the thing that we talk about a lot is this contested convention and the fact that these three other candidates are praying that he doesn't get to 1237. But there's a chance that he has this momentum and starts rolling, and momentum gets him to the magic number.
Well, that's right, especially, Brett, with these winner-take-all states coming up. If he starts winning those, you don't have to have a majority to win all the delegates. You get them all if you win, you know, by a single point. So that could, you know, he could then begin to gather enough delegates that he would be over the top. On the other hand, look at it this way. Look at this from the point of view of a Republican official or a Republican member of the House or a Republican who will be on the ballot in November. You're looking ahead to a convention in which it is, at least if he doesn't get a majority of the delegates and the convention tries to nominate somebody else and the Trump people get up and walk out, what chance does that leave the Republican Party to win in November? I would say very little. So the Republican Party's in a position, they may not like this guy, but they want his supporters' votes. And the question arises, could they ever get them without him? And then the question, of course, arises about Trump himself. If he were to win, what about the Republicans who don't care for his positions and don't believe he's a conservative and all the rest of them, the people who support Cruz and others? What would they do? So this is an unappetizing look ahead for Republicans, it seems to me.
Well, what about that, Brett? Because what we're seeing in this race is unusual compared to what we normally see, which is at this point you have somebody with Trump's win record, which is impressive by any standard, and the momentum would be clearly behind him, and the numbers would be going up in terms of his percentages with the Republican Party. And we are not necessarily seeing that yet with Donald Trump. In fact, what you're seeing is growing calls of concern. His numbers with Republicans are falling in large measure. There was a poll out today by ABC News, Washington Post, that showed a 30% drop among strong conservatives for Donald Trump. He was at 82% favorable in November. Now he's down to 52%. Overall, with the general electorate, the impression of Donald Trump, favorable 30%, unfavorable 67%. And so what's happening is there is still a large faction of the GOP that says, as they put it, never Trump. How does he get past that?
Well, there are two ways to look at this, Megan. One is to look at it from the point of view of Trump himself, and that is, if he is in a position to win and hopes to win, he's somehow got to rally the people who don't care for him to his cause, because he'll need them in November. But just from the flip side, though, is the party itself, if it's going to win in November, they need Trump's voters. So, you know, I think this is a tremendous quandary for the Republican Party. And, you know, the idea of a contested convention, we'd all enjoy seeing that because it would be a great story. But from the point of view of the Republican Party, there's nothing pretty about any of these scenarios that I can see.
Brit, as always, thank you.
Well, Donald